You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 14th of April, 2026, on Monocle Radio.
The US blockade of Iran's blockade continues. Does anyone still care what Russia thinks about anything? And is Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orbán only the first far-right domino to topple? I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. My guests Bill Hayton and Julie Norman will discuss the day's big stories, and we'll hear from the President and CEO of the World Travel and Tourism Council about where and why people are still taking holidays. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller, and I am joined today by Julie Norman, Associate Professor of Politics and International Relations at UCL, and Bill Hayton, Associate Fellow for the Asia Pacific Programme at Chatham House. Hello to you both.
Hello.
Bill, first of all, you have been travelling to, actually you've both been travelling to far-flung places, but yours, Bill, seems more further-flung metaphysically as well as actually physically. You went to Myanmar?
I did, and it was very strange because you go to Yangon and it's like going to Yangon always used to be. Really, I was expecting to see signs of civil war and security presence and that sort of thing, and it's sort of weirdly normal. I mean, you can tell that things are not normal because there are two exchange rates. You know, there's an informal and a formal one for your dollar, and you can't get certain brands of toothpaste because of the import restrictions. And the big thing, of course, is the fuel problems. I mean, but that's mainly to do with what's going on in the Middle East rather than to do with what's actually going on in the civil war. But you kind of got the central part of the country is this little island of where the civil war isn't, and then all around in the hills, there's a massive civil war and people are dying.
Bill, listeners who are familiar with your reporting from that vicinity might have assumed, as did I, that the Myanmarese authorities would be unkeen to welcome you.
Well, I didn't go in and say, hello, I'm a journalist and apply for a journalist visa, I would say. But I didn't go around being overtly journalistic, and I was careful. You
didn't have the trilby with the little press card in the hat band.
Ask every taxi driver for their view on the situation. But and I was careful, not to go and see people who I thought would either get into trouble if they met me or get me into trouble if I met them. So it was a kind of half in and half out trip, I suppose.
And Julie, you are just back from Montreal, a delightful city where you continue to tour your book/play.
That's right. I was just back in Montreal, where I used to live for about 6 years, and I was doing a book talk of my new book, Gaza, the Dream and the Nightmare, and also a reading of the play by the same name, which was a lot of fun. It's the first time I've done a reading of the play with people who I did not meet until about an hour before the performance. But we had done some online stuff, and it worked, and we had a full house, and it was a really, really wonderful space and a really great time.
Who did the casting? I mean, this is the I'm not even sure what genre this is, but this is the equivalent, surely, of Chuck Berry just turning up in cities all over the world, arranging in advance for some pickup band to be on stage and just telling them, guys, it's all 12 bars in A.
Oh my God, a Chuck Berry comparison. What more can one ask for? I mean, this show is awesome already. I put out a call just through, because I lived there, through friends, through colleagues, and just said, I'm running this play, any students or theater people, who might be interested. And one beautiful thing about this project is people always come forward from it, it has not been hard to get volunteers who want to participate, which has been great.
Well, we will start in the Strait of Hormuz and the question of when a blockade either is or isn't a blockade. In theory, the United States has been mounting a blockade not just of the Strait of Hormuz, but all Iranian ports, including those beyond the strait in the Gulf of Oman. While a handful of ships have been recorded not only sailing to or from Iranian ports, but using the Strait of Hormuz itself, this may have been before the blockade involving more than a dozen US warships and dozens of aircraft was properly up and running. The idea appears to be that ships which violate the US blockade will be intercepted in some shape or form once in the Indian Ocean. Bill, first of all, there are now some reports that some of those ships which travelled through the Strait of Hormuz have now decided that discretion is the better part of valour and are going back. But fundamentally, do we perceive much in the way of rhyme or reason here? Because this seems like Iran announcing we'll block the Strait of Hormuz and the United States going, well, we'll show you, we'll block the Strait of Hormuz.
We can do a better block than you. I mean, I guess the difference is that the Iranians were prepared to let certain kinds of ships go through if they paid a toll to the Iranian government, and perhaps, they were going to friends of Iran. And the big beneficiaries of that were the Iranian tankers that supply the little, what I call the teapot refineries in Shandong province in China. So I guess this is a way of squeezing both Iran and potentially China, I guess, if you're from sitting there in Washington. But the knock-on consequences are going to be massive. I mean, those little teapot refineries produce the diesel that's used in Southeast Asian economies, for example. So the ripple effects of this are going to kind of spread across the world and presumably just mean upward spikes on oil prices.
Julie, I'm not saying I would be willing to make this bet if I owned one of these ships or was aboard one of these ships, but supposing someone does call the US Navy's bluff and just says we're coming through, what actual options do they have? Because at the risk of tempting fate, I would think even for this US administration, sort of arbitrarily sending an enormous tanker to Davy Jones' locker to prove a point would be a bit of a reach. I'm not sure what the technicalities of stopping and boarding a vessel that size are. I can't imagine it's easy.
Yeah, it's unclear what this would actually look like in practice, right? And I would say, though, we know from the U.S.'s operations off the coast of Venezuela prior to the U.S. doing that operation that they won't hesitate to at least target some ships and use military action and to strike crews, even ones that would be considered civilian under international law. It's a little bit different with a tanker, obviously, and so I'm not sure exactly what means they would use to do that. But, also to Bill's point, a lot of this, just like was with Iran, with the mines, I think the U.S. with the blockade, so much of it isn't exactly, is this ship going to be hit, but more the risks to shipping companies, the insurance rates around it just don't make it worth it to go through the strait anymore. So that's why Iran has been able to say throughout all this, the strait wasn't officially closed, but just ships aren't going to go through there if there's now a risk not only from Iran, but from the U.S. as well.
I mean, Bill, is it clear, though, what the US definition of success is here? I mean, it's clear enough to see, I think, what was in it for Iran blocking the Strait of Hormuz. That's Iran saying, we always could have done this, and now we've done it, and you see what the effects are. We pretty much, well, not literally, metaphorically have our boot on the windpipe of the global economy, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. But what is the United States actually trying to accomplish?
It's a good question. I guess the answer is whatever President Trump says is victory, and then he'll declare it, and that'll be a win. But in any objective measure, the nuclear, highly enriched uranium, the decision not to support Hezbollah or other militias around the region. I mean, these could all be potential, things that the US might want out of an Iranian regime. But I mean, if there's no sign that the Iranians are going to back down on that, I mean, who knows? Maybe we'll end up with something that looks just like that nuclear agreement with Iran that Donald Trump tore up, in his first administration.
It would be unwise to bet heavily against that outcome, I think. But Julie, is this perhaps posturing ahead of a resumption of talks? Trump has also said in the last few hours that maybe talks will resume in a couple of days, but by now I think surely everybody prices in this recurrent tick of his of just naming vague time spans. 2 weeks is his usual favourite, but maybe in 2 days. He's sort of suggested to people, don't leave Islamabad.
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously him putting another factor into the mix, and that can go for negotiations or it can end up spiraling upwards as well. But in the first month of this, we saw obviously intense military pressure from the U.S. Now Trump is trying to put additional economic squeeze beyond the sanctions and limitations that are already on Iran from the U.S. So he's trying to put another factor in there that I think, and I'm relieved, is not striking power plants and desalination and the civilian infrastructure and bridges and the way he was speaking to. So it gives one more thing to negotiate on. I will say we are hearing some murmurs that there might be some room for additional negotiations. I do think that room is there. I think it's clear, even despite the quote-unquote failure of the weekend, that both parties are looking to de-escalate in some kind of way. And the idea that they would get to an agreement in 21 hours when the last nuclear deal took like 21 months was, no one actually thought that would happen to resolve some of these bigger issues that Bill alluded to, which are still a nuclear issue in addition to some of these newer issues like the Strait.
Bill, it's not clear how this will factor into the dynamics of any discussion, but does it look to you like maybe one side is more anxious for this to be all over than the other?
I would think that the Americans are more anxious. I mean, the Iranians are kind of, they're in a bad place. I mean, it's getting worse, but it's sort of incremental. Whereas, if inflation spikes, the oil price spikes, the closer we get to those midterm elections in the US, and I think maybe we can see that Donald Trump is rattled, because he releases kind of crazy, social media images, and then we will go and talk about that instead, rather than sort of talking about foreign policy disasters.
Just a final thought on exactly that, Julie. What do we make of Trump's ongoing, indeed apparently escalating vexation that it turns out the Pope is Catholic?
Oh my gosh. I think someone in the New York Times wrote today about Trump has Pope derangement syndrome, and I think that's that pretty much is it. I mean, I never thought I would see some of these headlines, but I would say, Trump he's rattled a lot of the MAGA base with this war and with the foreign interventionism. He's rattling another big part of it with going head to head with the Pope and the American Pope of all people. Some of these the jokes don't just write themselves around some of these things, but I do think it's politically risky for him to do some of the things he's doing, and it's not helping him at all with his popularity in the U.S.
Well, to China, which is the itinerary undertaken by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, doubtless glad of the outing. He is welcome in much less of the world than he was a little over 4 years ago. Advance press has it that Lavrov will discuss with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi the wars in Ukraine and the Persian Gulf. Also in Beijing this week, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, whose country was praised by Chinese President Xi Jinping as a key link between China and the EU, while Sanchez himself was commended for his moral rectitude in declining to facilitate whatever the US believes itself to be doing in Iran. Bill, first of all, in all of the photos that emerge from these events, President Xi rarely looks like he's a massive barrel of chuckles and having a whale of a time. But nonetheless, do we suspect, or at least I certainly do, that when he contemplates the current lot of China's great rivals, Russia and the United States, he's basically laughing himself to sleep every night, surely?
Yeah, I think he must be pretty chipper in lots of ways. He does have this sort of cultivated boredom face that he kind of greets pretty much every leader. One of the leaders one of the delegations you didn't mention is the United Arab Emirates, who was also in Beijing. And there are some interesting kind of internet rumours that the UAE asked the Chinese to stop supporting Iran, and the Chinese told them in very undiplomatic language to go away. Unconfirmed. But it's sort of, China will decide who its friends are going to be, and we're not going to take any lessons from you, little UAE. I guess China sees itself as not really, it has been preparing for this, for a good year and a half. It's been internally talking about preparing for a worst case scenario, and they've got it. So they've been stocking up on oil, they've been stocking up on, rare earths and gold and all the things that they need. I guess the big problem for them is if the world economy takes an absolute, dive, then they can manufacture all of this stuff, but who's going to buy it?
Julie, Lavrov has apparently spoken to his Iranian counterpart, Abbas Araghchi, and told him that he believes that the conflict has no military solution. If that is the case, does Russia have an ideal outcome here? Is Russia, I guess, much like the United States, just sort of wanting it all to stop?
There's a bit of just sitting back and eating the popcorn, I think, with this, too. Russia's benefiting. To Bill's point that, China isn't able to import as much, raw oil from Iran anymore. I think imports from Russia are up like 16% in March because of that to China. Moreover, for Russia, just seeing Donald Trump and the U.S. more broadly kind of stuck in this increasing quagmire is very much is something that they're fine with, and certainly distracting from Ukraine and distracting Europe from Ukraine as well. So I would say Russia has some different timelines, I think, that they would be fine with than the U.S. in this. But I would also note, speaking of the U.S., that Trump and Xi are supposed to meet also in May. I think they were supposed to meet back in March, and that's now been postponed for a couple of weeks. So that's on the radar too, that the U.S. will be be in this. And the U.S. still wants to, keep pretty good relations with China for trade purposes.
Bill, as far as it's possible to tell, does China have a discernible view on Ukraine now? Because there was this conventional wisdom that 4 years ago and a bit, we saw Putin go to China for the Winter Olympics, and this was apparently discussed, and what emerged was that Xi Jinping was like, well, okay, fine, whatever, if you must, but make it quick. And since then, of course, when in a period in which Russia has obviously failed to make it quick, there are sort of two competing thoughts. One is that China would like this wrapped up because they do prize stability, because it makes it easy to do business, and they do have interests in Ukraine. And versus the more cynical suggestion, which is that Xi is quite content to watch Russia's military being smashed to bits all the way on the other side of Russia from where he is.
Well, there is that, but I think the stability argument probably is more powerful for the Chinese. I mean, I guess they would probably be just telling both sides, and actually they do publicly say that, they kind of have these very simplistic peace plans, stop fighting, have negotiations, build things, and if only it were that simple. I think they would probably be very happy if the Russians, Ukrainians basically said, well, we'll take the ceasefire line now, and we'll just sort of carry on. The Russian military is becoming more sophisticated as a result of the war, so I guess that might potentially be a future worry, for China. But it's clear that Chinese businesses, are going to be in a very dominant position for future technologies, and Russia will be a customer for them, and I guess Ukraine and the rest. And they're trying to make an offer to European countries and countries that basically aren't the United States, come to daddy, and we can trade and we can support the rules-based order in the way that we define it.
Julie, just finally on this one, is Russia's diplomatic capital much diminished, though? Because it has not been revealed whether in this conversation between Lavrov and Arakci had any sort of sarcastic, passive-aggressive remarks to make about the much ballyhooed Iranian-Russian Treaty on Comprehensive Strategic Partnership that was signed last year, and so far as we know does not appear to have done Iran a great deal of good in its hour of need.
Yeah, not a lot, and I think I don't think that's really surprised anyone, knowing that Russia's somewhat distracted elsewhere. But that hasn't been complete. There certainly have been credible reports that Russia has supplied really useful intelligence to Iran with different kinds of targets and things like that, and also regarding the shipping lane. So there's some back and forth, and certainly Iran has, I think, probably helped Russia more in terms of drones and that kind of thing. So there are interactions, but I would say a lot of this, I think, is built more around a sense of resistance or opposition to the West more than real tangible benefits in many ways in actual conflict times.
Well, to Hungary, which is undergoing the historically unusual experience of having one of its parliamentary elections regarded as an event of planetary significance. This past weekend's rout of Fidesz, the populist nationalist party led by interminably serving Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, has also kicked a key pillar out from under the global far-right platform. During his years in office, Orbán had sponsored a considerable network of NGOs, think tanks, commentators and conferences. However, even, perhaps especially, the intervention of US Vice President J.D. Vance, who scrambled Air Force Two to Budapest to endorse Orbán in the last days of the campaign, couldn't save him. Julie, how big a blow do we think to the global far right is this?
Yeah, I think for Europe, it probably will have more impact than for MAGA or for the U.S. In Europe, obviously, Orbán, just a figurehead of this kind of movement. And then in real terms, too, in terms of, providing funding, hosting conferences, these kinds of things. And really just the vibe shift there, I do think kind of slows the momentum for some of those movements, even if it's not a knockout blow in other places. For the U.S., though, I think the impact will be a bit more minimal. If anything, I think the affiliation with Trump and Vance might have kind of hurt Orbán a bit, especially with the recent adventures in Iran and Greenland and whatnot. But some of it's just structural differences too, right? The U.S., you have term limits. You don't have, someone who's been in power for 16 years, and just a lot of people across the spectrum get disgruntled with that. And also in the U.S., it's a two-party system. So the fact that in Hungary, you can have another candidate who's still conservative, who's still considered, right-wing, not nearly as right as Orbán. Provide an alternative in the U.S. in a two-party system, you just wouldn't have that. So I do think the electoral effects will not be mirrored in the U.S. as they might be elsewhere.
I mean, is it clear yet, Bill, why voters turned on him? There's been a lot of, I guess, romantic interpretation of it from people across Europe further to Orbán's left, which is, not a small cohort. But is it possibly just the case that, as Julie is suggesting, and it does happen, I think it's an undersold factor in elections, people just got sick of him. It's just like, we've seen enough.
Yeah, I think so, and I think let's give the winner a bit of credit. Peter Magyar. He worked extraordinarily hard. Touring the country, kind of shaking hands, all the rest of it, and then that I guess allowed him to break through a political system which is utterly, and a media system which had been utterly dominated by Fidesz and Orbán. And I guess people could see things like the sort of the criminality of the sort of the mafia state and that sort of kind of elements to it. So that a lot of the sort of the civilizational rhetoric kind of took him so far, but at the end of the day, if it wasn't delivering, and people could kind of see the stuff that was being handed out to Orbán's mates, that kind of thing, I think probably annoyed them. And by putting Peter Magyar up, then people could vote for him in a kind of safe way. He wasn't going to kind of, make everybody kind of sign up to being trans supporters or whatever it was going to be. He was going to be a good sort of conservative, but he was going to kind of, not be a mafia don.
I mean, is there a possible lesson there that should be absorbed by other parties, perhaps even including in the United States, Julie, who are running against Fidesz-like incumbents, that maybe the centre-right is actually where you beat them from? Because, everything was flung at Peter Magyar, but what you couldn't fling at him was that you're some sort of like crazed left-wing communist pink-haired headbanger, because he's clearly none of those things.
Yeah, and there's always a debate, I think, in politics, and certainly in U.S. politics, and this is on the left and the right, is do you go more center-right or center-left to kind of broaden the tent, or do you double down on your positions? And I've even heard some analysis of Hungary's election saying, look, it was because, the sense that if you can't turn out your base, then that's where you're losing. That's when you lose. And Steve Bannon has been saying that in the last 24 hours, saying, if anything, the lesson to learn is to double down on the hard positions. So I do think the U.S. will be wrestling with that, but I think more it's the sense of recognizing that voters do want change. And again, that will personally happen with Trump, despite people worrying that he'll stay on for extra terms. I personally don't see that. And also, I think a lot of it just comes down to the economy also. That was a consideration for many voters in Hungary, and that's always a consideration for U.S. voters, too. And, as much as we political scientists like to nerd out on all these other elements, the vast majority of voters are just voting on, am I, better off now than I was a few years ago? And I think that is, and Trump is losing that right now. And I think that's more of where change will come in some ways.
Dare we hope, Bill, that Fidesz-adjacent parties might take heed of this and think, well, maybe we should rein in the EU bashing, we should rein in the grovelling to Putin, we should rein in the hostility to Ukraine. It turns out that even our own voters don't really like all that.
I guess it depends on your electoral system, really. Isn't it? If you're going for, kind of win a proportion of seats in a proportionally determined parliament, then, go for it. But if you're trying to win a presidential election when only one person wins and you've got to build a broad church, then you've got to kind of get at least some of the centre ground on your side. So therefore, you've got to play down, some of your most, nationalistic language. And I guess we're seeing that a bit in the UK here with Reform, trying to take a sort of centre-right position, and, but on other places, I guess it just depends on how they allocate seats and whether you just take your 25% and be happy with that.
Well, to Japan, where it says here something called guilty consumption has become a thing. Guilty consumption is apparently a trend/cry for help in which youngish folk go hog wild on the comfort food and drink in order to make them feel better about whatever angst they are burdened with. Seeking to take advantage, a new soft drink has been brought to market called Guilty Tansan Nope, which may have lost something in translation. It blends 99 different flavours, an enormous quantity of sugar, and sounds ghastly. Also, at least one chain of Japanese corner shops is now flogging something called guilty convenience store meals, upon which antisocial shut-ins may gorge themselves. Julie, anyone for a glass of guilty Tansan note? We didn't send it. We don't actually have any here. We can't do a blind taste test.
I mean, we should have that, though. That needs to happen. I mean, I don't know, like, is it that the comfort food trend is new, or is it that calling it guilty is new?
Possibly the latter, I suspect, but whatever.
Okay. I mean, because I was going to say, like, the comfort food thing is not new. I feel like these kind of, like, crazy concoctions, though, like, I don't know. I feel like there's always going to be fads and trends like that. I'm usually safe with my chocolate, my peanut butter, kind of like standbys. I don't really need the new things. But yeah, obviously, like, things like this, they're going to pick up. And if you have young people using it, they're going to be posting on it, Instagram, TikTok, and these kinds of things can blow up on those. So.
I mean, various beard-stroking analysts, Bill, have noted that Japan already does have something of a problem with young people, specifically young men, who simply just do not leave the house if they can possibly avoid it. But there are some suggestions that it has become worse, not just in Japan, but everywhere, that this is a hangover of the pandemic of 5 or 6 years ago, when large numbers of people grew perhaps too comfortable with just staying in, being entertained by screens and sending out for sustenance.
You're talking to a father of a young man. Get out of the house! Yeah, I think you're right. And I guess it's partly, financial. There's a lack of disposable income. People feel they don't have the money just to go out and kind of, blow it on a night out. But yeah, a kind of, a retreat indoors, and a kind of, I mean, trying to explain to young people, kind of how we used to just ring people up and talk to them, and they now seem to think that's some kind of massive infringement of somebody else's personal space to actually kind of call them and speak to them, and it's. I guess it's a lack of confidence. It's a way of finding safety and security within your own little space that you curate, whatever. But it does feel very, very dry and unfortunate.
And is it that thing? And we discussed the syndrome in different circumstances on this show last night, Julie. That humans have this tendency to lapse into something that's not as good as whatever the alternative is, but is just easier.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Yes. And obviously it became so clear, as you said, during the pandemic. And then just for our students who have grown up with, or say young people who have just grown up with every kind of interaction you want, like on your fingertips. And I see it with my students where instead of being out, I mean, they will sometimes, but they will even say we spend a lot more time just like lying on your back on bed, like scrolling and like, or chatting with people online than doing things. And it's easier. It's like, yeah, it's less costly. So when you have all that right there, it's, I think it's not as hard to make the argument to go out. And then with people being able to order food in so much easier too, even the idea of treating oneself or kind of the guilty pleasure thing, you can still do that from your own bedroom.
To bring it back to the guilty eating thing, Bill, we have already kind of heard Julie admit to the peanut butter and chocolate. Do you have any such?
Do people listening to this program know what a hot cross bun is, do you think? I mean, I managed to snaffle 2 on the way here, so I guess you could call that kind of...
But you can only do this, can't you, at one time of year? Or
well, unfortunately, with the supermarketisation, the hot cross bun is not an Easter delicacy anymore. It's a kind of 365 day.
Really,
it is.
I did not know that. Yeah. Outstanding. Bill Hayton and Julie Norman, thank you both for joining us. Finally, on today's show, the World Travel and Tourism Council has released its latest economic impact research, and the numbers are striking. The tourism sector contributed a record $11.6 trillion to global GDP in 2025. Nearly 10% of the world's economy. Clearly somebody's still going out. Travel and tourism also supported 366 million jobs last year, which is more than the population of the United States, and accounted for 1 in 3 new jobs created worldwide, in fact. To unpack what is driving this growth, here is Gloria Guevara, President and CEO of the World Travel and Tourism Council, who spoke to Monocle's Joanna Moser.
I would say is travel facilitation and visas. When you make it easier for people to visit your country, then they'll go. If you make it complicated or they don't feel welcome or there's no connectivity, it's complicated
In which segments are really driving then? Are we talking about luxury, domestic tourism, business travel, or are we seeing something else?
Last year, globally, we saw an increase in, it was bigger, the growth in business travel than leisure. But let's remember also that leisure counts for 80% and business for 20% of the total. And also post-pandemic, it was leisure, the one that started growing and recovering faster. But although leisure, as I say, for instance, in China last year, it was 11.7, it was 12%. But globally, it was 3.5%, while business was 4%. So leisure is driving in most of the regions the growth, although there are some, like in North America, business is very important in Europe. Second, luxury, of course. People now are spending more money in experiences and less in goods. Instead of buying products, they're buying experiences. Also, the fact that the new generations, they want to travel more. While in the past, we have Generation X and baby boomers traveling less. Now we have, on top of what we had with the millennials, the Generation Z traveling more frequent.
And as you were saying, you mentioned meaningful experiences. We hear this more and more. What does that actually look like in practice? Are people traveling differently or just spending more?
It's a combination. People are traveling, for instance, you see now that they want to travel for wellness in places that they can go to spas or have a connection with nature or have some sort of unique natural experience or something that is good for them, for their body, for their well-being. So we see an increase in wellness. We see an increase of authenticity. They want to travel and discover a culture or go to something that no one has seen it or just few people have seen it, something unique, a new destination or a new attraction, for instance. We see that as well. And then, of course, the experience is very important. We see an increase in luxury, and luxury travel means that house has free, that they take care of everything, and you really enjoy and make great memories out of that trip. And on top of that, they also look for experiences where they can combine generations that is good for the children, for the grandchildren, and families reconnect with loved ones. That's another one that we're seeing a trend as well. So that's why it needs to be meaningful, not only to go to a hotel room and whatever experience, it needs to be unique.
And as the sector grows at this pace, how do you reconcile that with mounting concerns around over-tourism in major cities?
Well, over-tourism and overcrowding is something that is happening in few destinations in mature markets. And according to the analysis that we have done and the research back from 2017 all the way until recently, it's a combination of factors. It's the fact that they have different plans, or the plan from the government is not aligned with the plan from the private sector, and they are not planning for that growth. And when you don't plan for that growth, it's very difficult to manage. Second, the travel and tourism is not considered in the master plans of the cities. So they don't plan for the waste, the water, or the impact of those travelers. So it is very important for these mature destinations to create new experiences so that they can move people out of the typical most frequent locations. And there are some great examples in the world of countries and cities that they have done fantastic and they don't have overcrowding. For instance, New York City, you go to New York City and yes, you feel crowded in Times Square, but because they have developed the 5 boroughs, now you have so much to see that people are moving around that they continue growing. So destinations, they have to decide if they want to maximize the return from travelers and tourists and share their experience, but it needs to be a balance. It has to be good for the locals and good for the travelers.
And the sector is also, in your study, you say, creating 1 in 3 new jobs. But are these good jobs?
Yes, there are great jobs because travel and tourism, not only it's a people-oriented sector, so it depends a lot of the service. It is also a sector that provides mobility. So you will find a lot of great stories of people that joined travel and tourism 30 years ago, 20 years ago, in an entry-level job in concierge, at the front desk, or even washing dishes, and currently they are CEOs or big organizations. Our sector gives you the mobility. You can move up or you can move to another country, relocate to another country. So yes, we have great jobs, but it's important. Our sector creates a lot of opportunities where there are no opportunities in many countries and destinations around the world.
And finally, looking to the decade ahead, what will fundamentally change about how we travel?
I think what is going to change is in the future, and what we're seeing trends is the fact that more and more it seems that we're going to have, or we're hoping to have more time. So we're going to be more selective in a way, and we're going to be also spending more of our disposable income in travel. We see that because humans, we love to connect with others, and we also learn from other cultures. So you will see an increase today. Travel and tourism contributes to 10% of the GDP. We believe that the share is going to be bigger in 10 years. It can grow up to 12 or 13%, depending, of course, the region and the country, but that's going to be the average. But more and more, we enjoy to travel, to connect. That's when we create memories. And the best memories that people have are with loved ones traveling. These are if you ask, we have done a lot of surveys, 1 out of 3 activities that make you happy is when you travel, and you travel with your loved ones. And this trend is going to continue.
That was Gloria Guevara, CEO of the World Travel and Tourism Council, speaking to Monocle's Joanna Moser. That is all for this edition of The Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Julie Norman and Bill Hayton. Today's show was produced by Anita Riota and researched by Josefina Astrid-Nagler-Gomez. Our sound engineer was Elliot Greenfield, with editing assistance from Christy O'Grady. I'm Andrew Muller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for listening.